All right, everyone, this is the preview video for submodule 1.1. And before we actually get into just a basic 3 to 4 minute preview of the readings for submodule 1, I'd just like to pick up where I left off in the second introduction video. The last thing I had mentioned when you were looking at the syllabus and the policies was plagiarism. As I was saying in the previous video, the internet offers just loads and loads of information on some of the readings that we'll be reading, the poems and whatnot, and maybe even summaries of some of the other things. But you don't want to copy that. If there's something you're confused about in the reading, you could turn to, say, a Wikipedia page on an author or a poem or something like this, and you might find some good info. But that wouldn't be a supplement to the questions I want you to answer, and nor could you really even answer my questions by copying and pasting answers. In big picture, you wouldn't want to do that for two reasons. A, it's the fastest way to get an F in the course is to plagiarize. So don't copy and paste anything. Just do your own thinking for the D2 outposts, and everything will go just fine. You'll get much smarter if you just come up with your own answer and your own interpretation, even if you're worried about it being wrong. There aren't really any wrong interpretations. I'm feeding you ideas in the course so that you can have many interpretations, because there are better and worse answers in this course, but we can't really say right and wrong, because this is a course that's teaching you that there are multiple ways to interpret the world around you, in this case the environment, or what we define as nature or wilderness or human uses of nature. So there's multiple ways to see every poem, and this course, which deals in literature and the environment, will teach you, a decent handful of those strategies based in ecology and uses of nature and all different other things. So don't plagiarize. It's totally not worth it. You can't really buy papers online, again, nor should you. You've got time to do the course, and you're paying for the course, so I hope you take the time to do the work. If you're under some type of stress for a deadline, you'd be better off contacting me by email than you would trying to copy. So don't do that, please. That's all. For the homework process, I'd just like to remind you, I've got it on the screen here. Go to the submodule 1.1 in this case, which we're beginning. This is the preview video. It doesn't have a review video, but future modules will, of course. The 1.2 preview video will be right alongside the 1.1 review video. In the review videos, I'll provide more answers of depth concerning the readings. Here I'm giving you the questions and some context, but not giving you answers, because I want you to work through this on your own and then check it against my answers, so to speak, in the review modules, or in the review videos, I should say. Otherwise, so watch the videos first. You can open up the reading packet and reading questions alongside the preview videos, so they're all working together to get you ready to read. Use my reading questions as a guide to your reading. Again, I can't be there, so I've tried to predict as best I can what you'll need when you're reading and what questions you would have concerning, like, why am I reading this? What should I be looking for? So I've given you a fair amount of heads up, as much as I can. Don't forget that there is a space on D12 discussion I think it's called course questions, where you can post questions that you have about concepts in the course. If there's any confusion after watching my review videos, you could still post a question there, and I'll check that every day or two and send out a group email addressing any questions that we had. Moving on from there then, after you do your readings and you've answered some questions, remember you've got some required questions and some optional questions on the reading questions document, and then go ahead and write about 400 words or more and post it into D12 discussion. All right. Once you've posted your 400 words, you are done with that module, although those ideas will come back around and will be used, or will be eligible to be used, on the midterm or the final exam. Last thing I jotted down, look at the D2L example on what a good answer looks like. I've got it posted, first post of the semester, and use the meal formula. Main idea, evidence, which will be a quote or a very specific paraphrase from a poem or reading. So main idea, example. Analyze that. How are you interpreting it? Tell us why you interpret it that way, what idea from the course you're connected to, or what you're seeing, what you're making it mean, so to speak. And then link back to a major idea from the course, or something that you maybe mentioned earlier in your post, or maybe link it back to the reading question. And that would be good. There's a nice formula for answering questions. All right, let's move on to the readings for today, and just a brief warm-up. You've got the reading questions, and so they'll do most of the work. You'll see on most of the PDFs that I typed in questions saying, be thinking of this here, notice this here, notice this here. I think there's less of that in the 1-1 readings, but there is more of it in later modules. But you might have some in there as well. But so Carolyn Merchant, you'll be reading the intro in chapter 1 from Reinventing Eden. Who is Carolyn Merchant? A very, very prominent environmental historian who is deeply concerned with how we interpret texts about the environment. So she's an obvious starting point for a course. She's going to load us up with a lot of good ideas. And the ones that I chose from her book are the big ideas that will structure our later reading as well. So we're dealing with literature. In the beginning, she's talking about connections between the environment that are very, very ancient ways of seeing humans and our relationship with the environment. She's talking about the fall narrative, which we'll read about, the recovery narrative, and then eventually the dominion or domination narrative, and one other, the stewardship narrative. And those are the 4. So that's why I'm starting with this reading. I think you really enjoy the first section that we read. She opens up talking about Starbucks and city parks and how we see this and what this is doing for us in terms of our connection with the environment, and more or less our identity and our imagination as humans in connection with the environment. So look for that. And then the reading shows how we imagine and socially construct the environment and nature around us. Nature isn't, this is a big point, nature isn't just an object out there that can be scientifically captured and defined like some specimen, but rather we always shape nature with our imagination according to our uses, our human needs, right? So that tree in your yard is beautiful one moment and a nuisance the next, right? And that could be, that's a simple interpretation. There's a lot more ways we can see a tree. You can cut it down and sell it for money. You can cut it down and use it for firewood to stay warm. If it's small enough, you could dig it up and sell it to your neighbor, and they could plant it. Who knows, right? There's all different types of things. Something as simple as a tree can be. And when we look at everything out there in the world, all the environment and nature around us, this is equally true. And nature is always defined by our needs, right? So, Chapter 1 is called The Garden Planet. Open your reading questions and give it a look. Here's the big things we're looking for, though, but you'll have more refined reading questions. What are the 2 major narratives? Well, they're the fall and recovery, but what are they? And why do they both have the same flaws in their thinking? You should have answers to that eventually by the end of the Merchant reading. Where do they come from? This gets to their ancient roots. We'll be looking at the Bible, the opening of Genesis, the very beginning of the Bible. The second chapter that you read from Merchant will take you deep into this. That's the Fall from Eden chapter. And then here's a big one. In what areas of modern life do we find them, right? And that's something you'd want to recognize as well as we go. And I'll cover answers to those questions in the review video that you should watch after you've done your D2L posts. All right, so chapter 2 then, Fall from Eden. There's our 4 big narratives. Have those down. You'll be using those over and over in the course as a starting point to interpret literature. In our next module, you'll be applying these to various poems and to actually like newspaper articles that we see out there. And we'll see how our idea of what nature is currently and how, let's say, something like climate change is affecting us relies heavily on assumptions that are based in fall, recovery, stewardship, domination, or dominion. And you'll see these things aren't just in the Bible, but influence social media and modern media around us as well. So again, here's the questions we're shooting for. You can look at your reading questions for more. Here's one big takeaway. What specific harmful behaviors or harmful behavior patterns does Merchant identify in the initial view of human-environment relationships in Genesis? So she says, right from the beginning, the Bible tells us nature is for this specific use, or we are supposed to think of it in this certain way, and that might have created at times problems throughout history. And not just for Christians or for Christian culture, but for world culture, or any society that is even mildly influenced by the Bible. And let's face it, many of them are, right? So look for this. What's a specific way of looking at nature that could be problematic, that was captured and encoded early on in ancient times in the Bible? And then that'll be one good takeaway here. Of course, that wouldn't be the only reason that we mistreat the environment or misuse it at times, but it'll be an early one that's been prominent throughout human history. All right, so Genesis, the Bible is literature, of course. When you read through here, what I'm really wanting you to look for, you'll be reading the same things that Merchant talks about in chapter 2, the second chapter you'll read of hers. So I want your insights here. Look for what Merchant taught us, but I want your insights as well, and that's what I want you to do at Genesis. And then we'll move on. We're going to read something else, the Hymn of Aphrodite, which is actually written about the same time that the Old Testament was written, give or take, as much as we know. And so we're going to read the Hymn of Aphrodite, and I picked Aphrodite because she seems like an interesting parallel to Eve, and you'll learn a lot about Eve from the readings, and you'll be reading on Adam and Eve from the first bit of Genesis that you'll read. So what we're looking for here in one way is similarities and differences between Aphrodite and Eve. So why did I choose this? Because Greek literature probably has an equally large influence, or at least a very large influence on Western culture, as does the Bible. So look for differences. You could look to Aphrodite and Eve, or just how nature is portrayed, or what nature symbolizes, right? Nature symbolizes in the Bible a fallen world, a world that is not perfect anymore, a world where sin exists, and also a world where we're in charge of nature to some extent. We're supposed to dominate it in a number of ways, which you'll learn about in the readings, and see if that's what's going on as well for the Greeks in the Hymn of Aphrodite. Or are we not supposed to dominate nature? Are we stewards of nature? Are we supposed to take care of nature instead? What are the environmental messages that are coming out of the Hymn of Aphrodite? And so I've outlined a few here. One, the environmental messages. Is the environment simply to serve humans, to be dominated by humans? Or is there a large separation between people and nature? As there is in the Genesis message. There's people and there's nature, and they're not. Genesis suggests we don't have to live with nature in balance in the way that we would call ecology in the modern age, or ecological balance in the modern age. We see sort of a misfit between nature and people in Genesis. So is that what we're seeing as well in the Hymn of Aphrodite? Or are people in the Hymn of Aphrodite living in balance with nature? So you can look at the way that symbols are used, symbols of nature, trees, animals are referenced, what people are doing if they're farming and using nature. So look for things like this. Those are the environmental messages in the Hymn of Aphrodite. We can also look for gender messages. The Merchant reading is going to teach you a lot about gender, and the gender messages we get about nature and who is nurturing and who is not, and who's supposed to dominate and who's not. And so you'll get some of that. And so here, in the Hymn of Aphrodite, do we see men as the agent or the dominator? Or can women dominate in some way, in a way that they couldn't in the Bible, at least in Genesis? Does Aphrodite have some power and some agency? Eve doesn't have much in the Bible. So maybe Aphrodite has more control over environment, more control over other people, or some parts of nature at least. So look for that. You might notice persuasion versus domination. Aphrodite is always trying to persuade people in Hymn to Aphrodite. But in the Bible, there's a lot of domination, it seemed, going on. So see what you think there. Is there a message of general domination? And that's what people should be doing with nature or with others in the Hymn of Aphrodite. So some compare and contrast with Genesis, and what Merchant teaches us about domination in the Bible will be of interest to you as well. Some quick vocab here, and I will post this script, so to speak, for what I'm giving you right now on D2L. But Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, and pleasure. Kronos is the god of time. You might think about these things. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to do this quick. Athena is a goddess of many things, including justice, law, and wisdom. Artemis and Hestia are also goddesses. Some of these are connected closely with nature and family. What happens in Hymn to Aphrodite is Aphrodite tries to have an influence on these people that are closely connected with nature, and she fails. And so she turns elsewhere to try to influence people. She turns toward a man to try to influence a man when she cannot influence these feminine women goddesses, right? And so that's the beginning of the hymn. And so you'll have to see where it goes from there. But here's some background for you and some vocab and who these people are. So I hope this is helpful. I'll post this online so you can read it closer, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.